right, so welcome back for hopefully does look like our last our WDU task force. So as we've done in the past, we'll do a quick round the room. Hello, and then get an introduction from the folks online. And the good news is we do not have to read the crazy remote participation policy today because we have no one participating remotely. So yay for that. So Mike, we'll start with you and we'll go around the room.
Next up, Ted DC Nova.
Scott Adams, Wire Woods.
Abby Hamoud, Department of Housing.
Morning, Megan Van Dam, Housing Department. Anna Shapiro, Department of Housing.
Candace Bennett, Planning Commissioner.
Tom Fleetwood, Housing.
Bill Cash.
HRNA Advisors.
Olivia Simpson, HRNA Advisors. Rachel Waldman, HRNA Advisors. Travis Seltzer,
Almost with City Board. Mondoro, Acting Supervisor of Public Office. Ryan Reiser, Manning Homes.
Bill Roadhouse of Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance.
Great, and online, Poonam.
Hello, Poonam Ramgopal, Supervisor Kathy Smith's office.
Barbara online too? No, okay, we're good. And so I have on here schedule, but this is the last meeting, so we will just check mark that one. And I don't think we have any announcements. Any? Okay, moving right along. Let's go ahead and move on to, go ahead.
Can I just, packet that you all have, there's both the presentation, but then we also received 2 comments from 2 task force members who are connected here. One is from Lenore Stanton and the other one is from Eric. So if you just want to take a look at that, read through it, they're at the back of your packets. And then also, if and when this is the last task force meeting, just a reminder, we will. I know, did I just jinx it? Sorry. This is there's still a process ahead of this with the plan and the board presentation.
Yep. Okay. All righty. So now we're going to move on to our additional analysis on the geographic applicability and extended affordability recommendations from HI.
So, good morning, all. Nice to see you all again today. So just as a refresher, I know that we spent a lot of time at our last task force meeting going over all of our recommendations, and we were in alignment on 4 out of the 6 recommendations we're making. And so today we're going to be walking through some additional analysis we did to support our recommendations on the affordability levels, particularly the inclusion of units at or below 70% of AMI. And then also questions around geographic applicability of extending the existing WDU policy. And so we'll actually start with the geographic applicability questions. So as a reminder of our findings from the analysis that we had done earlier in the process, we had looked at areas that were planned or zoned for medium to high density development. And then we had looked at where those areas were located. And we looked at the home sale prices in the areas where the policy would be extended versus areas where the policy applies. And from that analysis found that there was not a meaningful difference in home prices, and that in most cases, the areas where we were planning to extend the policy were just adjacent to the areas where the policy exists. So we did some additional mapping. And so in gray, you'll see where the existing policy applies. And then in the blue, you'll see areas that are zoned for medium to high density. And in purple, you'll see areas that are planned for medium to high density. One place that I do just want to make sure that we're aligned on is this area, the areas that are highlighted, they might include parcels that are currently built out. There wasn't a way for us to easily, from a GIS perspective, filter those parcels out. But what we did do is for the areas that are in South Central Fairfax, so the areas that are in the center of the county that are not adjacent to other areas, we did sample a number of parcels that are highlighted on this map. And in all cases, those particular parcels are already built out. And so while the map here is showing all parcels that have those particular planned or zoning codes, not necessarily, the policy wouldn't be extended to highlighted parcels that are already built out. And so again, what we're recommending is extending the policy to areas that are both planned and zoned for medium to high density residential, because of the analysis that we had done previously, looking at home sales and geography. Any sort of questions or comments on this particular component before we move on to the 70% AMI question?
Did you happen to do any spot checks of some of the other areas where you sort of see a concentration? I'm thinking like Route 1. I'm assuming most of those zoned for mid to high density are probably already built out, but that's just yes on my part.
We had sort of sampled a variety of parcels kind of throughout the county, and from what we found, everything that we sampled was built out. We're happy to kind of send, we have the like identification of which parcels we sampled in the back in the appendix of this worksheet. So in the copy of this packet should be available. If it's not, happy to send it to you. But we did find that in what we sampled, they're built out. And to be clear, if a parcel is already built out, the policy wouldn't apply to those areas because it's already built out.
So before we move on, is there anything else? There's nothing else on geographic applicability, right? Okay. So how does the group feel about potentially trying to see if we're at consensus on this before we move on to the probably deeper discussion on the levels of affordability?
Just flashing up the actual recommendation that you guys, and last time you'll remember it said just zoned, but our analysis covered zoned and planned, so we made that change in here. So that's the recommendation at hand. So not extending to housing. Any other questions on that one?
How do we feel about this? Thumbs up? Any thumbs down?
A lot of good head shakes. I see a lot of good head shakes, so.
We're good?
I guess I'll just jump in since I was probably the most verbal last time. I don't have any problem with the extension. I think it answered my question in terms of what that difference was between the plan versus the zone.
Great. Okay, so
And I didn't have particular problems with that. I just wanted to see what the policy change would, know specifically what we're voting on. So
anybody else? So we're good?
Yeah, I would just add, we are going to further work with our GIS staff to be able to do that level of analysis to remove these parcels that were sampled to and others that were built out. So as we progress through the next steps, we'll have this map refined. So you'll notice if you follow along, and hope you do, that the map will change slightly. Those parcels will be removed. Fewer areas, with fewer areas.
Okay, so it sounds by the crickets in our room that we have achieved a consensus on this part of our recommendations. Okay, so now we'll move on to extended affordability.
Right. One down, one to go. So a reminder of when we say extended affordability, what are we discussing here? So our recommendation was, in tandem with removing and eliminating the 120% AMI units, was to include some units that are affordable for households earning up to 70% AMI. And so what we had done is we had looked at the need in the county of where there was demand for lower price housing units. We looked at the impacts on revenue from producing 70% AMI units, and also found that in many cases, when you looked at the AMIs of units that were being produced, some areas were already producing 70% AMIs. So because of that, our initial recommendation was to expand the program to including a share of units at 70% AMI. And so the distribution of units that we were recommending would be 4% at 100% AMI, 4% at 80% AMI, and 4% at 70% AMI. So to take a step back to one of the things that we had talked about in our first meeting, just as a reminder, is how long 120% AMI units stay on the market. So in this particular case, 120% AMI units stay on the market for over a year, versus when you look at units, particularly at 70 or 80% AMI, they sell much faster. We took a deeper dive into looking at the units that are priced at 120% AMI, and then looking at the prices in which those units actually sold at. And so what we found was, of the 12 units priced at 120% AMI, 5 of them sold at prices that were set to be affordable to households earning 120% AMI. Additionally, we found that one unit, which had its price reduced to a price that was affordable to about 110% AMI, and then one unit had its price reduced to sell at a price that's affordable to 100% AMI. And then 5 haven't sold. So a takeaway here is that of those units, even that have sold, of these 120% AMI units, they're not necessarily actually selling for those higher prices. And so in looking at the policy as it was written, we did a comparison of how revenues would be impacted and looking at revenues that would be produced from WDUs if they were sold based on how the policy was written. We compared that to, we looked at sales from the AMIs of units that were actually sold to see what the actual differences in revenues were. So to start, we created a model development because we thought that in order to really show the true impacts, it made sense to actually look at this from a development. So in this particular example, which is using the WDU distribution that is in the policy, we have an 84 unit, 3 townhome development of 3-bedroom stacked townhomes. The average market sales price of those units is $644,000. This number is informed by the market research that we had done that informed our analysis. That's the base market price that we used. Based on how the program is written today, with 4% of units at 120, 4% at 100, and 4% at 80, this is the breakdown of units that would be in that development. 3 units at 80% AMI, 3 at 100% AMI, 4 at 120% AMI. So when you translate that into revenue from this model development, those 74 units that are priced at the market rate sales price produce about $47.6 million in revenue. The remaining.
Sorry, I mean to interrupt.
No.
I'm out of curiosity, the market sales price, does that include, I guess, figuring in the ADU component that would be required for an 84 unit development of stacked houses? Or is this just assuming that all 74 of those remaining units are?
Keep the math simple. We just assumed that they were all market rate, just to try to keep things as like apples to apples and show and make it as simple as possible.
So to be clear, 10 of these units are ADUs and they will be priced, or WDUs, they'll be priced according to WDU prices, whereas the remaining 74 are assumed to be market rate.
Okay, it's fine. I mean, that in reality, you would have an ADU component of a project.
So the market sales number would be lower.
But
I don't think-
Yeah.
figures ADUs and stacked towns, the ADU requirement is higher than a WDU, so you don't have WDUs
Yeah,
in
you're
that
right. You wouldn't have
scenario.
WDUs in that scenario, so.
It's really only
Unless
when
you're
you
not
don't.
using the full density bonus, so you can have a partial.
That's possible.
Regardless of the approach, I don't think it changes the math we're focused on, which is what you're going to get on a WU sales price.
We're in this, as we walk through, we're not changing the market rate component of this at all. We're just looking at the effects of different affordability levels from the WDU component, how that affects revenue. And so in this case, where it's the policy as written, those 10 WDUs produce sales revenues of about 4.9 million. So
Rachel, that's assuming the max price.
that's assuming the max price of the WD policy
That we.
as it's written.
Can I ask why, you did the 4 at 120? Wouldn't it be 4 at the 100?
It
If I make your math better.
It was because of the way that the math works. We were gonna have to have one unit that was added extra sales price. We just chose to allocate it to the 120% unit. When we did this analysis, we just always did the assumption that that extra unit would go to the higher WU.
I'll let you keep going. I think what you've done is helpful, but, you know, keep going. You might look
Yeah.
better if you put it to the 100. But because you're,
So we're trying to be conservative. So if we put it to the 100, the difference we're talking about will actually be smaller.
right,
So
isn't that what we're trying to do?
we're trying to show, no, we're trying to be, you guys are saying this is a concern. So we're trying to show you the biggest difference it would possibly make. So we're actually trying to do it the other way.
There's some other tweaks here that will make a bigger change, so, but you keep going, because that will be something where.
That would be a change in your favor, not against you.
Right, but there's other comments that make
Just,
it worse.
I mean, just to be clear, when you say like in our favor, like, we're just trying to
More
get,
net
we're just trying to get the,
Right?
the best information. Like, nobody on this panel is like opposed to trying to get more affordable.
Sure, but the thing we're trying to measure is the gap in the change rate. So a change with 120% AMU actually makes it a larger number. So the delta is smaller. So it would be in favor of the developer because it would be more revenue for the developer. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I agree that it's lowering the number. I just, the framing of that, you know, it's not an us versus,
More profit for the developer or more revenue for the developer? Is that
well, maybe feasibility of moving a development forward, sure.
because they're having more revenue?
Because you can actually get a deal financed and build it, sure.
Because there's greater revenue.
I think it's.
Okay, let's continue.
Which I just, we're really trying to be sensitive to that, like, we know there is a loss of revenue. And we want to make sure that comes through clearly here and be realistic about that loss because it's not nothing. And that's kind of where this discussion is coming from on the 433. So then that can loss. But we can go into the next slide and show the.
So I think that an important point to keep in mind is, and I know that we've said this a bunch of different ways, is that the policy as written with a third of your WDUs at 120% AMI, that's not actually in reality the prices that units are selling. So what we looked at was the number of WDUs produced. So this is just of the WDUs that were built, the distribution of units. And then on the right, when we look at the number of WDUs that are in the pipeline, you see the distribution of units. And in both cases, you'll notice that the 120% unit category is smaller than what is dictated in policy. And in both cases, there already are a handful of units priced at 70% AMI that have been produced and that are in the pipeline. So I think this is an important concept to keep in mind, is that what is being produced is not actually totally aligned with the policy as written. And that when we start looking at the sales prices of the units that have sold, those are also not necessarily in line with the policy as written. And so what we did is looking and focusing specifically on the 120% units. When you take out the share of units that haven't sold, when you look at the number of AMIs or the number of units that have been sold, over half of them actually have been priced at either up to 70% or up to 80% AMIs.
That's a quick question. the 70%. Is that because someone's proffered down to 70% or because they felt they had to reduce their price 70% to sell the unit?
It's a mix of both.
We're I can speak for one of our projects is property at
70.
Yeah, so
It's
I think
property at-
probably next. It's property at 70 and 80.
Oh, yeah.
WDUs, so that's just saying that.
What area are you doing? Is that Dallas Suburban or is that?
We have a mix of WDU and ADU on the property, so like
Okay.
WDU 70, 80, and then ADU, basically like the ordinance.
Is there a pricing for 70, 80 that's separate from just 70? Because I'm like, yes.
No, sorry, I'm trying to make sure I understand your question.
Well, I'm like looking at these prior handouts and there's, I think in the last presentation, I pulled it up and it had a pricing for 70, 80. But when I look at actually a pricing, WDU pricing schedule, they're hard numbers. It's like 80, 70, 100. So there is no 70, 80, like in the middle.
It's really up to 80% AMI, but if we're also talking about up to 70% AMI, like the units that are up to 80% AMI would really be targeted at those between 70 and 80% AMI. It's just a labeling thing. It's not.
Sure. It's fine. Okay, let's keep going. I don't want
No, it's okay. Yeah, like.
I'm looking at, it looks like the 70, 80 is between the 70 and the 80. That's why I'm asking the question. It looks like the pricing amount.
The actual amount.
Can we pull, I mean, we're good to look at there. We'd love to go look at it. That'd be good.
And have that, I can pull it up. It might take me about 5 minutes. Keep going while I look it up.
But do you want to get through the presentation or do you want to?
Let's just, we can just like walk through kind of the math here and the concepts, and then I think we can like go in and look at the actual pricing.
So just clarify one thing. So just, I think I'm 99% sure I'm following this correctly, but I just want to make sure. So basically the chart on our left is we're facing it. So you're saying that there's been 70% AMI WDUs that were produced. That's what they were. That was sort of what they were. That was profit.
Yes.
And then sort of an additional when we hit reality, they went to go to sales. And there was one of the higher income, probably 80% AMI unit sold or 100% AMI unit sold at 70. So that's so basically so what we're saying is there's the baseline policy that says 4% at 120, 180 or the baseline policy that has up to 120. Developers in practice are proffering up deeper levels of affordability in some cases, but maybe not all. And then so that's sort of another point of comparison. And then when we hit actual reality in sales, that it tends to go deeper.
Yes.
Okay.
And so what we wanted to look at and make sure that we understood was we now know the distribution of WDUs that sold by AMI. So if we were to apply that distribution to our example development, that would mean that we would have one unit priced at 70% AMI, 5 units priced at 80% AMI, 3 at 100, and 1 at 120. Now, again, this distribution here is mirroring the distribution of units as they've sold. So the distribution on the pie chart on the right here, we translated that and applied it to our 84 unit development. Make sense before I move to the next slide?
Yeah.
So we then compared what the revenues that would be generated from WDU sales from the program as written, which would be 4.9 million, assuming that a third. But we compared that to the revenues that we produced from WDUs that actually sold, which is 4.2 million. And in that case, when you apply that at the development level, that's about a $700,000 difference. And so what this is showing is that when you look at the policy in reality, it's not matching the policy as it was written. And so when we are doing our comparison to understand the revenue impacts from our proposed program, we're not comparing them to the policy as written, because that's not how the policy is actually playing out in reality. We're looking at and comparing to the set of numbers on the right, not the left.
Kind of ask a question, maybe this was what Martin was asking. Are the WDU sales prices based on the sort of the updated numbers we discussed in the previous meeting? Okay, so they're not based on the currently published price schedule, but the one that will be published, imminently soon.
Yeah, and that would be really helpful to see that schedule. I guess I'll just cut to the chase. I'm fine with this. The presentation is where I'm still hung up on. And we can handle that outside of this. And I can send it to Megan. And if you want to include it the way I potentially try to show it. What's confusing about this one is that, if you're mixing in there proffered 70% or something of that, I think it almost needs to be shown as like what it was on the old pricing, what would it be under the new pricing, and then what would it be now with the new 70% category. And you can remove the 120, because I think everyone agrees that the 120 is never going to happen. And when I do that math, and I just did it this morning, I get in a lot bigger variances. So like between and I'm using only the 2022 pricing, I'm getting almost $1 million pricing difference between what is allowed versus what's actually happening, because I'm just removing completely the 120. And then when I show the proposed, I'm showing another like $500,000 to $700,000 change. And actually so when you really compare it from the current policy to what we're really proposing, it's like a $1.6 million change.
But when we talked about it last time, we were saying, but we're all falling short of the current policy, like that.
I know, and I'm
Yeah.
saying that's fine. Like,
Yeah.
I think.
But you want it
You still
shown.
show it just
Yeah.
to say, hey, no one's really getting it. But then if you're still comparing it from what is really happening, and maybe I'm being a little bit too conservative by saying no one's getting the 120 and it's all going to the 100. If you just do that, let me just do the quick math. The difference is more like almost $100,000, which I think your next slide is going to say 300,000. So that's where.
From the original.
So it's 300,000 from where prices are actually selling.
Yeah, but
Yes.
what's actually selling includes, I think, is proper 70%, which shouldn't be in there, because that is more of a supervisor coming in and saying they want us to proffer down to 70%, not policy. And so it makes a little bit more apples and oranges a little bit when you include what's actually happening, because what's actually happening also is, I got a project where I'm proffering all at 80%. So it should be kind of a comparison of just what the policy is now and what the policy will be. And then in between, removing the 120 because no one's getting the 120 and showing that difference.
I think one point also that you made is that we've sort of made a couple of adjustments through the course of this process, right? And so we're showing kind of the impact of one, but we're also incorporating the impact of another, which is that the pricing schedule and all kind of seeing what the right way to kind of price it is to make sure it's affordable. So I think that's really important to sort of separate that out. And I think we can absolutely show that, especially like in the next steps when we go to the board and everything and work with you to make sure like we're all on the same page about how we show it. So that is very clear what the task force has like kind of discussed and like why we are recommending these things.
Yeah,
That makes a lot of sense.
We want to show it because we know it is real. And so if it's a matter of presentation, I think we actually probably have a slide that did that.
Yeah.
And we took it out, but I think we hear you on showing it. And you
It
can.
is, it's like a simple Excel spreadsheet, and you could just show it all. You don't, but in the presentation format a little bit, but that was the hard part. And I've read these slides a couple of times, and it's just, that's when I had to do the math myself. I'm like, I'm not seeing how we're getting here.
Yeah.
That's why I also said, hey, you might want to allocate. I mean, truly, I think, Scott, I don't know if you agree, but like, hey, if we're doing a rezoning, and we're doing that, and there's WDUs in that, we're not putting like the highest like number on the 120. It'd go down probably to at least the 100, if
Yeah,
not to the 80. So that would help you out a little bit.
Yeah, in reality, if you've got an odd number, it's gonna go to the middle tier.
Right.
It's folks won't. It's allocated, it's not good, so. It's just the reality of, what we're actually seeing.
Right, and that'll shrink the difference, but you're seeing a different number potentially because of the 2022 numbers versus the 2023 numbers?
No, I'm just, because your middle assumption here, where it says the 70,000 difference, is based on historics, which include proffered reductions of the affordable tiers. So that 70 is currently not in the policy. And so someone's proffered down to that. And then, potentially that's the bigger chunk of the 80s, it might be someone's proffered into all 80s. I don't know. But I would just, again, I think it's fine maybe including a slide of like, hey, this is historically, this is what this would impact on the historical WDUs, but just showing it just purely of what it was and what it is, it would be really helpful.
Yeah, there's like a piece of the story missing that like there's sort of like more bespoke proffers that are not necessarily in the policy, so that people are coming in. And so like what is being delivered also has this additional local impact, or like, an impact from like how it's gone through the process and what that community needs. I think that makes a lot of sense to be able to show both of those things. So like there's sort of the straight policy, and then there's kind of like, but really in reality, there's not only are we selling them for it, but there's also the, kind of the community input and like kind of how everything kind of comes through the process. Then we're actually at this reality. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
So just really back to deconstructing how we got to the actual a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. Like why that 70% is the way it is now is not necessarily because they're selling low, because you can't sell an 80, but because that's the reason you have more hundreds than 20s, but it's because of these additional, sort of proffers that are a little bit different than what the policy says, and they go a little bit deeper.
I would show the map in the staff report at least. They're just tables that would be really simple to show.
If I'm maybe I'm reading too much into some of the things that have been said about sort of the proffering at deeper levels, there is sort of, if we're talking about the extent to which a new policy change might have an impact on sort of the average project on the ground, as we're looking at the historics and sales and difference between the targets or what's been proffered at the sales, there's a difference between, say you have an 80%, there's a difference between a unit that sells at 80 or 100%, but was targeted higher and they weren't able to sell. And that's where the market is the binding constraint. There's a difference between that and a developer based on the individual circumstances of that project proffering up something at 70 or 80%.
Yeah.
So I don't know, fundamentally, it doesn't necessarily, I don't know if it changes the macro analysis, or
Deconstructing and being clear about it.
Yeah, that would be because if they're proffering it up, that's not necessary. I mean, part of the justification for reducing the 120s and, going a little bit deeper in the targeting is that sort of that they're not helpful from a market perspective anyway, because they're not able to achieve that. So not
to get into it, but being able to explain actually this policy is giving some of the things you would normally get through proffer. So please keep that in mind when you think. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And ideally, you wouldn't include proffers at all. You would just do what's been adjusted based on market. And but you could circle about that. That'd be
and the numbers, quite frankly, the numbers aren't really like high enough that once you start breaking that down into such, it's
and show it that way. Like I think what I heard Anna asking us to do is like to show the deconstruction. So I think we can show like there are multiple steps. I think showing that almost as here are the different cuts that happen on an actual deal. We start with this number and then things keep getting cut, and the number we land on is the number that actually ends up being the math that matters.
And for your benefit, I don't know that you were here last time for the conversation. The issue for us is we just need to be able to go out and explain this to the industry when the proposal comes out, to be able to very clearly tell them, here's what the policy is. It's not working. Here's where the actual numbers are, and here's what the change is. And we're we're talking about is like $4,000 a unit.
It's a very reasonable.
Yeah.
I would also imagine them not being a bit often in these sessions is yes, to the industry, but also to elected officials of these are things you ask for normally. So please, we build some of this in the policy. So
Yeah.
The idea of stacking another 10 or 20% on top of this, which you've been in the habit of doing, might become problematic if you actually want to see homes.
And it's similar to when we went through the rental piece, which is if we're adjusting these numbers, let's have these be the numbers. So everybody has an expectation when they're coming into the process and knowing what that is. And there's always going to be variation, but I think a commitment up front that like, let's have the numbers be the numbers.
We have that conversation with councils all the time for creating inclusionary zoning policies. If you're clear on the numbers, then it can get priced in the land value, and that's better. If you're not clear on the numbers, it comes out of development, and you get less development and therefore less affordable homes.
Scott's point too is like, and John and I both go back to the sellers. The clearer we can show, what's happened here. So it's not just a it's also just.
Yeah, we've literally had this conversation all the time. If we'd much, say a little craps of it, we'd much rather squeeze the landowner because from a public policy perspective, we need development to build houses. We don't want to squeeze a development deal. 20% zero is still zero.
So, yeah, so.
Second.
Good.
I was just gonna say, in terms of like the actual numbers, maybe I'm just still not following sort of, I think what I heard you say is your numbers are showing sort of 600,000. Difference, the numbers that you got in the packet are showing 300,000. I mean, where do we think that difference is coming from? And what do we think the right numbers actually are?
It sounded like, and correct me, the price, there was a change in the pricing, and I think this is what you were calling out. There was a change in the pricing. And the pricing actually goes up for 23. And so this is the compounding, the affordability mix plus trying pricing gets you a bigger delta. Am I thinking about that right? Recommend that. Like using 22 numbers versus 23 numbers.
So I'm assuming 22 numbers. So I didn't have 23. So I don't have 23.
Sorry.
But I only had one number from 2023, which was the 80% three bedroom. I think that goes down to like 375. But if I'm using the table above, which is assuming just 22 numbers, $531,000 is the difference. And again, the difference being, to your question, Scott, is because they're including like what's actually happening, which includes the proffers, people profiting down to proper. So when you remove those and you kind of sanitize the numbers, then when you get closer to like the 600, and maybe it's almost like 650 to almost 700 once you include the 2023 pricing.
Okay.
But
I think it's those two things. If you deconstruct it, just think about the numbers. 23 numbers are slightly higher because AMI shift. And then frankly, we're measuring a delta. What are the two lines we're measuring between? And you.
the 23 numbers actually coming down because we made a change.
And the pricing.
Because we made adjustments for.
Yeah, the pricing is high, but you're going to price points are different. Yes.
Price points are lower now because what we're doing is including for the condo fees, the the HOA fees. Right.
Not.
Well, and affordable for sale pricing is also a function of, it's not just AMI increases, but interest rates.
Yeah.
So, DC's IZ affordable homeownership pricing guidelines fell dramatically from 2022 to 2023. I think from our sales prices that in DC that are subject to IZ pricing are going down because the interest rate increases are so substantial.
So isn't that 300,000 you were talking about, that difference? Isn't that a function of, I'll use the word, but I don't know if it's the right word, the phantom income that like we all wish the policy was achieving? Isn't that the difference? 300? We probably need to see your.
Yeah, I'm fine sharing it, but I'm more curious now on, do we not have pricing for 23? I thought there was a pricing sheet.
We are showing prices higher for 23 than they are in 22. I think that is part of, I'm not saying that the whole thing, that is part of.
Is that what? Why do we have a slide in here on the old package It shows it going down.
Because that's a different set of adjustments, I believe. I can't speak to all of it. I'm just looking at the numbers right now, what we actually use. They are high.
For 2026.
And so I think that that's part of the factor there.
Although, of course,
But I
yes,
also
they
think,
will
but I also think the other factor, just going back to that, we're measuring against different delta. We were including the proffers, you are going to exclude proffers. So we're measuring for two different points. And then the numbers we use for 23 are not the numbers you had for 22. I think those things, I believe those are the two fundamental differences we're talking about. And we can absolutely lay those out in Excel.
Yeah.
At full level detail, but that sounds, we should all see the exact same numbers and see exactly how it got to where it got. We might still, I think we've agreed that we're going to deconstruct how we got to the delta so that it's very clear. This is where the policy takes you, and then this is where conversations with elected officials take you.
So was I wrong when I said the $300,000 difference based on the proffered people reducing it?
You're not wrong. I think there's both a pricing difference and there's a pricing difference for 2020, 2023, and then there's inclusion of the proffer. And those two things together are why we're coming up with different numbers. I believe we should do the math and go through it, but I believe those are two things together are what's going on. Sorry.
I just want to ask a question about this issue with the proffered 70% as opposed to sort of the de facto 70%. And this is really sort of this is a question very much for our development partners and their experience. To what extent, if any, would you characterize the proffering at 70% to be in and of themselves a reaction to the market? So, so in other words, are our partners agreeing to 70% units because that's what the market's asking for anyway?
I can give you my perspective. I think everybody recognizes there's a market at 70%. The reason that I think you're getting that included in proffers is because you have certain supervisors who are telling you you're going to proffer at 70%. And it's not a function of like the economics of the project.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
I don't know if you guys.
We had that conversation, and that was something that hadn't been as clear to us in this process, is like the level of unpredictability that goes into your process. And, in theory, there's a perception behind whatever. This process can't change that.
Right.
But, sounds like that's pretty significant.
I think part of and I think we sort of touched on this point earlier, is by kind of baking in some of these lower units into the policy. It's like we, hear you, this is a priority for you, and the policy is reflecting that. So theoretically, and there's going to, conversations that come that way, but there shouldn't necessarily need to be this like push from a supervisor for more of these units because it's baked into the policy.
I think certainly on the go forward, I think to Martin's point, I think those are outliers in terms of like the proffering to the 70%. And so it feels like that's skewing the numbers lower than I think they sort of are in reality under most projects. I don't know if you would agree with that.
I agree.
And what we can say when, as we're sort of going to the board and making these presentations, we can sort of make it clear that part of the discussion was that we sort of expect this to be like not as much negotiation as in the past, hopefully, that the point was to sort of codify the policy, stabilize it, make sure that expectation is super clear. So when you're putting in a development project, you've already been able to like evaluate the financials in a way that it doesn't get changed a lot through the zoning process. And hopefully, maybe I'm not speaking out of turn, but hopefully we can sort of work with the board to help them understand that that's sort of the goal here, and that the development community will also be on board with that, because that the expectations and that sort of the predictability helps a lot with being able to actually finance these projects.
You don't have that on the ADU right now. So it's probably lower than what the ADU pricing is. So yeah.
I think also just that because of the timing of this policy, that the adoption of this, like, it's actually all the more important to have predictability, because otherwise there's a lot of other noise in the system. So making that point, I think, is really important.
Do you guys?
I was just gonna say, I mean, I guess in terms of like the discrepancy in the numbers, sort of setting aside, trying to break that down and figure out what we think the right numbers are. I mean, I guess the using the bigger gap that, you know, your numbers are showing, I mean, that is like $8,000 a unit in this scenario. I mean, is that something that you think is a deal breaker for development projects?
I'm okay with what we're proposing. I think if what he's saying is right, which is 2023 or up, then that should, you know, narrow the gap. I thought we were going down, so we need to look at that, but I wouldn't, you know, delay a vote on it, but and as long as we present it accurately and show all the math, at least give John and I a chance to go back to the sellers if there's an issue, you know.
I think, the only thing I want to add is like, I think for the stack 2/2s that we've done, I've gone back, we haven't really had a lot. Yeah, I haven't really had anything that sold at the 22 prices because I know they kind of jumped up pretty significantly from 2017 prices. So when I've been kind of going back and doing the analysis, I've just been using the 2017 pricing and then making the assumptions that we're eliminating the 120 just to kind of see what the difference would be. And at least from the 2017 numbers, it's not significant, you know, really to me is being a big difference. I just think because we don't have the data for the 2022s and then because of the small changes we made with the 23s, I agree with Martin. I'm not against it. I think we just want to know as much as we can so we can inform industry on it. So.
Very fair. Are there more slides?
I mean, the other slides were just doing kind of this comparison that like we've already just discussed. So here's the slide containing the information we just spent discussing for the past 20 minutes.
I have one other question. I know we're focused on sort of a larger project. Just curious if you guys ran any numbers on like smaller projects. I mean, I think when we see some of these infill projects, you know, they're in like the 10 to 20 unit range, and kind of what we think the impact is on a smaller project where you might have less of a spread for some of the overall project cost.
We ran 50. And how we sized the projects that we used is, you know, speaking with the development partners on this team, but also doing our own market research, just looking to see of the developments that are currently selling, like how big are they? And so that's how we recognize we can't test every single permutation, just tried to come up with a set that were as representative as they possibly could be.
Yep. I understand that. It's more of just curiosity that if we get that question as we're sort of going out, to make sure we don't have blinders on to a bigger impact for smaller projects that I think we're going to see more of.
Yeah, you're seeing more, you think you're going to see more of
I think we're just running out of land for big projects.
Bill, but does this actually apply to something under 49 minutes?
It wouldn't apply to, well, the WDU would. It
really
is. Yeah, so the ADU would not apply under 50 units, but WDU would apply, I guess now if it's anywhere that's 8 dwelling units per acre or above.
So just acknowledging we have run the numbers on it, how that would actually, why that would play out different is those are smaller deals. So every unit's impact starts to play out differently. The assignment question we started to get into about what gets assigned to 120 versus 100 versus 80 starts to be more important in that situation. Or
I don't know that it's necessarily the tiers. I guess I'm thinking that you know, there are some, development costs that might be fixed for smaller projects. And so you've got less spreading units to allocate that to. If I'm, out of my mind.
No, I mean, that's actually, most of our projects are in the 5 to 20 range. And we've had some bigger ones, but in the district, but yeah, I mean, we're in Fairfax County. We just went through a 3-year rezoning process to get 10 townhome units. It cost us over $300,000 just for the entitlement, just to get that rezoning. So I mean, if you spread that over, now obviously there's probably some increment where it'd be more expensive if we were trying to get 50. But it wouldn't necessarily be proportional to that.
Smaller deals are definitely tougher.
So yeah, it's less on the, it's sort of like the impact would be less on the sort of revenue side. It'd be on the sort of cost side. So you have less margin on the, you get the less margin to less profit in the deal to absorb something. Now, that's not our, we're a different type of developer, so it's not really pertinent to us because we're almost exclusively doing 100% affordable. So, but I'm just saying conceptual.
I'd add like more note on the sale prices. I know you guys use sort of the numbers that are available. I think some of the sort of, there's other costs that we haven't really incorporated here that can't really be quantified necessarily, like some of the holding costs I think weren't necessarily included. And what we're finding from the homeownership program is there's also sort of concessions that are made. Sometimes when the developer is using a specific lender, that lender is making some concessions that impact the buyer's ability to buy the first time, but don't necessarily aren't reflected in the final price. And so I think that's something that is, it's very hard to, I mean, we could probably get some of that data, but it's not really part of our process. It's sort of just to get the buyers to buy, but that means those, effective sale prices, while they are on the books, that's the right price, they're actually cheaper to the buyer. And so they're able to buy these units because of those concessions. So just kind of something important to think about, that it's sort of even probably, kind of like less, I guess the pricing now, or the way the program is structured now, it's sort of like less attainable, right, than we have it, just because of some of those, and then slightly more expensive to developers because of that. Just a couple of things that sort of an asterisk of things we couldn't really capture very easily in this analysis, but sort of it is additional, I guess, to sort of how this will improve the program. Any final questions or comments, or do we want to get the recommendation back up on the screen? All the way. There we go.
Okay. How are you feeling now? Thumbs up, thumbs down, comments, questions?
I'm fine with this. The only thing I would say is it's like, there still could be a commitment where, we can still come in and talk about some other process improvements we talked about, like the needs and things. I think if we can, John and I and Scott can go back to the industry and say, this is what it is, here's the math, and then, but some of these improvements and fixes, I think will help us tremendously.
Absolutely, and I know we've been talking about some of those, and we want to. I think we found a path to sort of making that, and also we've started speaking with some of our county partners to figure out how we can do it more efficiently in the actual kind of entitlement process and the permitting process. So we're really working on that on our side, and absolutely, I mean, we can sort of branch off into a kind of a bit of like an advisory, committee where you guys can help us identify those challenges, and then we can start to really make those more efficient, because that's absolutely, I mean, not only for, for the ability to develop, but also for our staffing and resources. It's incredibly important, and to make sure we can kind of get these through very quickly. So we're absolutely on the same page as well. That's not anything.
I would just say, again, I think after the discussion and getting some of the numbers, like I'm more comfortable than I was the last time. And so, I'm fine moving forward with the proposal. Obviously, we'd like to get sort of the financial breakdown that we were talking about, just so helps everybody kind of explain kind of how we got to where we are and what the impact is. And then just making sure everybody's in agreement on some of the messaging as this goes forward in terms of, adhering to the policy. So there's predictability for folks who are coming into the process, for landowners, for everybody who is a stakeholder. I think some recognition that, we think that the increase in development cost to developments, is manageable. there is in fact an increase. And so just a recognition that, there is an impact to the development, but one that we think projects can overcome. And then I think some of the stuff Martin was talking about in terms of just processing and administrative changes.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, that's even more reason why it's important to show the real impact, so we can show for significant price change. So some more certainty going forward.
Okay. So you seem to be in consensus? I see head shaking. Okay, yay. Here we are. And again, as we mentioned earlier, this is still a public comment period with the Board of Supervisors, with the Planning Commission. We'll also, there'll be presentations at the Board's Housing Committee, the Planning Commission's Housing Committee. So there will be continued opportunity to, again, as you said, deconstruct and talk about some of these calculations. So.
Yeah, I think we'll reconnect on those for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that was our final point on the agenda. So any last comments or thoughts?
Just very briefly, I do have a 45 slide presentation that I would like to make.
Since we've got some extra time.
No, I would just, on behalf of the Department of Housing and the Housing Authority, I want to thank all of our panel members who put in so much effort over these last few months to help us get to a consensus, help us make sure that we understand, the entirety of the concerns that industry has, help us respond to those concerns in a way that achieves our shared goal, which is providing a more affordability in a more effective way to the community. So we're very grateful to all of you. Want to thank our partners from HRNA who have been through this process with us, and also I want to thank the staff of the Department of Housing who have worked so hard on this, as well as our partners from DPD. Bill, thank you very much. Kelly Atkinson, who's not here today, and finally, Madam Chairman, yourself as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, then I think we're adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
We have an hour of your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay, yeah. I had a chance to connect briefly yesterday.
Yeah.
I've been a little bit remiss in following how we're about to close my construction.
I like it.
This would be an update.
I really thought I kind of knew that Mike was going to have some.
Yep, that was a challenge. I mean, that was before my time with Habitat, so I did that. I took about a month out.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yes, I'm really.
This is already a lot.
Thank you so much. Look at it.
Yes.